the kids inside of their church, they were anti-faith.
And what did that look like in those early days?
It started spreading through the underground radio. This was just like blowing up.
Modern Christians know more, but are changing less. What do you mean by that?
Why aren't more of our good Christians actually good?
Do you think that became the heart of what is the ministry of Life Action then?
I think it's the context that's so powerful for people. When they actually say my life is changing, they mean it.
How do we learn better through experiencing?
That's the most powerful thing of all in healing the human person.
Welcome to Changed Lives, a special limited series in which I explore the incredible stories of the people behind the scenes at Life Action, a ministry with a mission of reviving relationships through transformative events. Each of these individuals, my co-workers, have experienced God move in big and unexpected ways. The more I heard their stories, the more I thought, people need to hear this. In this series, you'll get a first-hand look at how God is working in and through the people of Life Action, the challenges they face, the faith that sustains them, and the lives being transformed along the way. Their stories are powerful. Today, I'm talking with Del Fehsenfeld. Del has an interesting vantage point in history with the ministry because his dad, Del Jr., actually founded Life Action over 50 years ago. Del is a relational health expert, counselor, and pastor, and he has a wealth of wisdom and insight into the state of the North American church. What is a holy disruption? And what is revival? We'll explore all this in our interview. As you're listening, be thinking how you might play a part in changing lives. Life Action is fueled by the prayers and generosity of people like you. Maybe you'll feel led to partner with people like Del, investing in the kingdom impact made every day. Today, I am joined by Del Fehsenfeld, and he is the Relational Health Director for Life Action. So, Del, what does that mean? Describe your current role.
Yeah. I just work with the programming of Life Action that helps people with their relationships, better quality relationships. A lot of it's marriage, but it's, relationships are the fuel for ministry.
Okay.
So we help leaders also have cultures where their relationships thrive and their ministries get better results.
We'll dig into relationships, but that's a good explanation of what that role means. So you are kind of unique in this ministry in the sense that you grew up here, literally. Your parents started this ministry. So there are lots of stories out there about how Life Action started. Tell me your version.
Well, I was very young, so this is what I just heard from my parents. But basically, my parents were youth directors. So their passion was kids, and they're thriving. So they got out of school, started a youth group in Florida. And one of the things my parents started noticing is that the kids inside of their church seemed bored, disinterested, not engaged in their parents' faith. And they were trying to work with getting them to have a real relationship with God, and started actually talking to them. Just asked, he developed a concept called teen rap, where they would bring their questions, they'd bring their music, they'd bring the things that they were interested in, and they would do all of their work with them off of that. And so as they started to talk with them about what was important to them, they actually discovered not just that they were not engaged with faith, they were actually pretty bitter against faith. They were anti-faith in some ways. So that really surprised them. And so they started to ask them about that. And a lot of it went back to their experiences with their families. So here were all these good Christian people going to church, and their kids were pretty disenfranchised with their families. So he started to, pray about that, work with them about that. And they started to have a rediscovery of faith and started to get pretty on fire for God and connected to it. And then a really surprising thing happened, which was that the church people started to actually push back against the youth group because they were inviting their friends, they were bringing in people that were not churched, and culture was kind of coming into the church, and so they were not happy about it. So they actually had to start meeting off campus. So they started getting other arenas and places in the city, civic centers, to meet because so many kids were coming. And crazily enough, the pastor eventually asked my dad to leave because he felt like the youth group was taking over or ruining the church.
Hmm.
So that was just a disillusion. I don't know if it was disillusioning. It was frustrating experience for them. And they started to think about what they were going to do. And they thought, well, good grief, maybe the actual issue holding back revival or evangelism in the country was the people who actually went to church. So that they started to develop a burden for church renewal. And that's why they started ministry.
Pretty radical thought at that time. And if you lay that on top of the historical context, right? This is in the 70s.
It was in the 70s, so there was a lot of spiritual awakening breaking out in the 70s. There was a lot of people who were into kind of the hippie culture, rock culture, whatever, that were coming back to Christ. But they were coming back in a different path than was a traditional way, and then they were not assimilating well into church. So yeah, it was definitely the era. So I think my dad felt the church had also lost its way and needed to be reformed.
What do you think he thought that the church has lost its way? Like, describe that thought to me. How would he have described that?
Yeah. I think just more concerned with keeping their traditions
Mhm.
and their sense of being buttoned up and righteous in that sense, religious, but had lost their heart for people, probably lost their passion for God, like at a deep level. And so he just wanted to see that come back.
Mhm.
The church should be the place that was leading that cultural, you know, revolution rather than resisting.
So bringing that concept back into the church, do you think that became the heart of what is the ministry of Life Action then?
Yeah, it was definitely like that's why the name Life Action, because he wanted them to have a re-experience of God's life, and he wanted to he wanted them to put that into action, like
Mhm.
actually loving people outside the four walls of the church. But then, I think also it became, how about starting with loving your families? Like, how about starting with some sort of integrity at your and authenticity in your families?
Yeah.
So I think it had there was a family focus that was parallel to the church focus, but that was being driven by his passion for new life and younger generation.
Okay. And what did that look like in those early days?
It looked like a youth ministry, but it was also it was pretty radical. Like I said, he was talking to people. So if you think about, we have a lot of talk shows and reality TV and all that stuff now, but then to actually let people air their opinions, to ask them questions, to give them the mic, some of the time was pretty scary or radical, different. It was also pretty exciting, intriguing to people because they wanted to hear, what we know as shock radio now was an underground like AM radio movement then. And there was this particular shock jock in the Tampa Bay area where they were, whose name was Weird Beard. And he made a habit, really, his show was trying to embarrass traditional leaders. So he would confront on the street, the mayor or business leaders or politicians. He would dig up dirt on people and try to expose their hypocrisy.
Mhm.
He was very anti-institution, anti-God. He got wind of all these kids that were like gathering and, to have religious services or to talk about God. So he started showing up at these events in part to discredit it like he normally did. He thought it was some sort of manipulation. And then he started talking to these kids and realizing that they were getting help
Hmm.
and love and it was real for them. And he actually became, in a weird way, like an ally of my dad. Like that, he started to put him on the AM radio, and they would have these moments where he'd step in and like hear a story of somebody's life getting transformed. It started spreading to the underground radio, so the youth culture was like, this was just like blowing up, right? So yeah, it was pretty radical,
Yeah. And messy.
and messy, and kind of part of the youth revolution at that time, and using different methodology and I think my dad just felt that any methodology that gave an honest hearing for Jesus was great,
Mhm.
and he was just pursuing that. So some of his techniques for that time, even how they started the ministry with eventually like teams that went to churches and incorporating um, contemporary music, just this all this stuff, which is commonplace now. wasn't in the early 70s, and he was kind of on the front edge of that.
Yeah. And do you think that the youth were attracted to that idea because of the genuineness of it, or they felt seen and heard?
I think the radical authenticity of it
Mhm.
was appealing. I think the fact that they were able to, bring their experience of things into the conversation was explosively attractive. And then the fact that they were having these encounters spiritually that
Mhm.
seemed, were real to them and were life changing. And I've talked to people since that their lives were their whole trajectory of their lives changed during those youth days, and it shaped their lives. I mean, they went to
Yeah.
ministry, they or vocations, and just had a very strong sense of God's call and His presence on their lives, going all the way back to this high school encounter.
So it's like a transformation that stuck.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was real. I mean, they were radically serious about
Mhm.
what they were finding.
And at what point then does your dad pivot and start going back into churches?
Within a couple years,
Yeah.
I mean, so he actually started to talk to other youth pastors, and he's like, "Hey, this is my experience with what's happened here in Tampa Bay." And so he just started to network with other youth pastors, and he's like, "Hey, this is what I'm hearing from my kids." And they're like, "Me too." He started to really feel like there were systemic issues in the families, the laity, um, that were going to church, that it wasn't it had gotten cold, stale, not real, not they weren't passing their faith on to the next generation. And pastors generally were not confronting that or dealing with it in a way that was gonna change anything, and so he just it kinda pivoted to a call to the church.
Hmm.
He really felt like, "Well, we need to bring this everywhere."
Mhm. And in the churches that he took, eventually buses full of college-age kids on the road, was it a disruptive experience for them? Was that intentional?
It was very disruptive.
Mm.
Yeah, the whole thing was set up to be, disruptive, to be both a radical expression of young people's faith. I think he knew that there was something, vibrant and awakening about an older person who had been in the faith a long time, seeing a younger person who was new to the faith,
Mhm.
who seemed to have more passion or more experience with God than they did. So it would awaken
Hmm.
like a hunger and also a sense of like responsibility. And so I think that was part of the strategy was like, what if we get older Christian people re-experiencing their faith through younger people?
Yeah. That multi-generational experience was really bedrock to it. Something that that you often talk about then is just this experience, the experiential nature um, of what we do here at Life Action. Was he grasping that at that point? Do you think that he understood?
I don't know what he understood.
Uh-huh.
I think that he had got swept up in a revival.
Hmm.
It was a season of time where God was working powerfully in gatherings of
Mhm.
people, and he had just seen this crazy stuff happen with these kids. So he knew that it was possible. He knew that when it happened, it moved the needle, and that it seemed to be what was missing.
Mhm.
So he was definitely after uh, intense seasons of experiential transformation.
And how would he describe revival? So we call ourselves a revival ministry, but that word has so many different thoughts around it. So
Yeah.
what do you think, how would he describe revival back then? And then let's relate it to maybe how we might just talk about it now.
Yeah, I think that it was in the name Life Action. Like, I think he saw it as an infusion of vibrant vibrancy in the experience of someone's, life with God and with other people. And so, you know, at the core of the word revival is actually the word life. So vive, that part is life. So you put a "re" on the front of it, and it's basically like a return to life, and I think that's what he thought it was.
Hmm.
And so I think they were explicitly after life, and the way it was gonna be measured, was whether it actually produced action. So it was literal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he put that name on it, and that's what I think he thought it was.
Yeah. And he really pointed to like biblical examples of revival, right? Like this was all grounded in the biblical narrative of these intentional moments that are set aside for disruption.
He was not he went to Bible college and
Mhm.
stuff as to be a pastor, but he wasn't a theologian.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think he started to read the Bible through the lens of what he had just seen. And he started to see that, man, there actually were these patterns all through the Old Testament of where people would encounter God. There'd be a generation that had this deep experience of life with God and faith, and they would set off in this amazing action. And then it would kind of go off course,
Mhm.
and get cold, get stodgy, start missing the mark, even get radically harmful. And then there'd be seasons where there would be some sort of radical disruption where that would come back.
Mhm.
And there was this pattern all through the Old Testament
Yeah.
where this was happening. And so, yeah, he seized on all that
Yeah.
in terms of just the biblical commission for a new season of that in our day.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, that's great. It's a tradition that we've had here now for over 50 years, right? And so now we fast forward to the present, and now something I've heard you say often is that modern Christians know more but are changing less.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Part of how I came to this in my own experience was when I got out of school for the first few years, I was pretty new in my personal faith
Mhm.
at that time because that's a whole other story. But I was really tuned in to wanting to do God's will. But I was still figuring it out. I was a mental health therapist, and we worked in a clinic that was getting a lot of referrals from churches,
Mm.
good churches in our area, and because I was younger, I was working with a lot of adolescents. So my colleagues sometimes would get the parents, I would get the adolescents, and they were very angry and had obviously they were there because they had run into life issues. But I remember talking to them and having the thought over time, especially as they reflected on their family situations and the things that were going on, is like how is it possible for a person to follow Jesus, to be in a good Christian church, to be a good Christian in that sense for 20, 30, 40 years, and yet not be a good person? It's like it seemed really odd that you could follow a good savior and not end up good,
Mm.
or at least a trajectory of
Mhm.
more, good. So I started asking that question. It's like, why aren't more of our good Christians actually good? And it started to alarm me really that things were not people were not more reliably becoming like the person that they were following. And then in my case, like when things actually completely fell apart, they weren't finding answers inside of their context, their church context. They were having to leave it and come to my office.
Mm.
And then what I found is that generally speaking, when people started to get back on track in our counseling practice, when we sent them back to church, church didn't necessarily become a reliable place to help them continue in the change. It actually wasn't helpful. I just remember thinking to myself, I feel like I'm just slapping band-aids on a systemic problem. Like if we don't have Christian context that are actually helping people transform, what are we actually doing there?
Mhm.
And I kind of developed my own passion. I remember telling a family friend that had worked with my father about this observation and like how um, disturbing it was to me, and also like how like I was just thinking about changing vocations because like I feel like we need to get involved with that. And he's like, "Well, this was exactly what your dad."
Right.
And I was like,
I mean, you're asking the same questions your dad was asking.
I really had gotten disconnected from that. He
Yeah.
died when I was 17, so I had gotten disconnected from that. So yeah, so that's been really my lifelong question.
Hmm.
Is not so much what should we believe, but more the question of what helps people transform. What I've discovered is that there is a difference between the things that we know about, or even that we would say we believe um, cognitively,
Mhm.
and the experience that we have functionally.
Yeah.
There's just a difference.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in closing the gap between what we know and what we experience.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about kind of outside of the cup, inside of the cup, right? The stuff that is on the outside of the cup, how can you get to the inside of the
Yeah.
cup when
Well, it
it's
is interesting because
Yeah.
then when you read Jesus,
Uh-huh.
he was in many ways obsessed with the same question
Mhm.
in his day because the religious people of his era, the people that would have been looked at as the good Christians, so the
Mhm.
good Jews, the good religious people, had the same issue that they were attempting to get people to transform by focusing on cleaning up their behavior.
Mhm.
And Jesus was saying, like, actually, what's underneath the behavior, what's inside the cup, is actually the things that are defiling the outside. So you're not going to be able to clean the outside up behaviorally without getting to the inside.
Mhm.
And that's really, I think that's the brilliance of what actually gives Jesus gospel power. Being a Christian is not about morally reforming your life, first and foremost. It's about an intervention on the inside of you that actually reorders your heart. It actually gives you capacity and power by the Holy Spirit on the inside of you. So I think what Jesus would say to the answer to that question is that if you're going to change the outside, you've got to have a revolution on the inside,
Mhm.
and that the Spirit of God is the only person that can do that. And it can be really what a Christian community is a group of people who know that, who've experienced that together, and then they're learning how to reorder and cultivate their hearts to be connected and in tune with God. And
Mhm.
that's ultimately what will give the fruit. So Jesus talked about fruit versus roots. He did say there is a connection, but the intervention has to get the level of the roots, has to be
Mhm.
at the heart level. So that's a completely different way of looking at what you're after, and then it follows then that you go after it a different way.
Yeah. And what do you think is that intervention? Is that what we do here at Life Action? Are we involved in the intervention piece?
Yeah, I think part of it is that we can actually lose awareness of even what we're after.
Mhm.
And so I think step one is actually stepping back and saying, wow, what do we actually want here? Like, what are we actually after? How are we measuring what successful is? How do we know whether we're on track? Awakening to that together
Mhm.
creates a hunger and thirst. Jesus said that's where it starts, right?
Mhm.
A poverty, a poor in spirit, like a willingness to say, we want more. And then a hunger and thirst after something deeper.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of what Life Action's doing is like helping communities come to that point together
Yeah.
so that it's not, so that we have an agreement of intention.
Mhm.
And we have a different vision. I think it works in that pattern. Jesus told a story about a person who finds a treasure in a field, and he knows now that uh, there's great opportunity and wealth acquiring that field. So the person leaves that experience and goes back and sells everything that they have in order to buy the field. So they radically reorganize their life as they pursue a different vision.
Yeah.
So I think it always works that way. We have to have a vision of what it is that's possible
Mhm.
for us, what it is that we really want, and that forms this intention that we got to have it. And then we're willing to pay any cost.
Mhm.
We're willing to make any sacrifice. We're willing to do any kind of repentance in that sense. That comes out of desire.
Yeah.
But when we come at it the other way, like we should be
Mhm.
this way, or you should be that way, or look how bad you're doing, or whatever, then that produces a certain motivation, but it doesn't last
Right.
because the inside of what we really care about is always going to trump what we think we should do.
Yeah.
So I think Life Action is working with awareness of that, and then also what are the means of actually cultivating this vision for what's possible in your life, and then going after it with all your heart.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then how would a community organize around pursuing that together?
Yeah.
And that's what we facilitate.
Yeah. And it really kind of gets at that idea of this lukewarm discipleship, right? Like how can you start that fire that's going to turn it from being lukewarm to being hot? And how do you go after that, right?
I think the reflexive, like what would be like the kind of the natural thing to think when you think about, man, my desires are leading me astray. Like I know I should want this, but I actually want this. I think the like natural thing is to say, man, I need to tamp down my desire. I need to not
Mhm.
want these things that I find that I want, that are leading me astray. I need to like that's the problem. But I actually think it's the opposite. It's not that our desires are too strong, it's that they're too weak. That's what
Hmm.
C.S. Lewis, said. He said, we're like children playing in mud puddles, and we have no vision or knowledge that there actually is a sea that we could go play in,
Hmm.
right? So I think actually it is always counterproductive, ineffective, it doesn't work to try not to want something. What we actually need is an experience of a greater desire, a greater love,
Hmm.
greater vision, a greater joy,
Yeah.
greater passion, right, that we can live into with all of our hearts. And our desires actually are meant to lead us back to God, or desire with a capital D, like
Hmm.
the satisfaction, the fulfillment of our desire.
Hmm.
They were never meant to thwart desire.
Hmm.
And I think we got that completely backwards. And so religion ends up becoming like a lifelong project to try to do the right things and not do the wrong things, when I don't think that's the point at all.
Yeah.
The point is to actually find what you were made for, and to actually want what is beautiful.
How do people tap into that?
Yeah, well, I think that's the whole experience of what Christ came to bring.
Hmm.
He said, I'm gonna actually introduce you to the good shepherd, the good father, the beautiful designer, of your soul, and to reacquaint you with what you were made for, to reconnect you to your passion and to your purpose, and to give you a path to life that is. He actually said it. He said, life that is actually really life to the full, life to the
Hmm.
max. So, in a really crazy way, what he actually said is, you find this by following me, by coming to actually understand, not only that I'm your savior, but that you actually can share my vision. You can actually learn to see what I see, feel what I feel, and then, yeah, to do what I do.
Hmm.
We are actually coming to a person who knows the way, and that's how we get there. Is by knowing him, walking
Hmm.
with him, being connected to him, letting his vision for what's possible for me become my vision, and then living into it. And so obviously it's a journey,
Hmm.
and there are practices,
Hmm.
you know, that,
Yeah.
that we accompany him in, that he showed us. And so we're connecting people to that in life action, but also it's not a journey we take alone.
Hmm.
It's a journey that we're meant to take with others, so that's the church. So we've really got to get on the same page together,
Hmm.
and that's what Life Action Health Churches
Yeah.
do.
And churches invite us to come in, right? They invite us to intentionally disrupt the rhythm of their calendar, to essentially take over, which can be very scary, I'm assuming, for minister leadership, um, and to present this vision and to invite others into it. But we're only there for 8 days, 10 days, sometimes longer, right? And then we go to the next church.
Mhm.
So talk about kind of how we come in and create the context or set up these conditions to kind of start this fire going. But then, I mean, because you mentioned it's a lifelong thing. It's not just a one and done. It's not a mountaintop experience. But our role almost can't be to continue to walk alongside of them. We're almost the disruptors in
Yeah,
a sense.
I do think having a Life Action team is disruptive.
Uh-huh.
So, and anybody knows that by looking at
Hmm.
the calendar that a church agrees to, like,
Yeah.
come in and actually have a concentrated season where you're going to meet together frequently, and you're going to spend time together, and you're going to give yourself to a process,
Hmm.
you know, with that time. There is a very important place for process. Like,
Hmm.
churches do a great job, I
Hmm.
think, most churches, of setting up an incremental, weekly, daily kind of like process where people can grow in their faith,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing a lot of the right things. There is this dimension to learning, however, that we don't learn only incrementally. We build, we build, we build, and then we take a giant step forward,
Mm-hmm.
right? And great teachers will tell you that part of taking that giant leap forward sometimes is that you've got to break out of the expected or the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
You've actually got to unlearn some things before you can relearn new things. And sometimes the element of surprise and unknowing, like not knowing,
Mm-hmm.
expectancy, um, risk, all these things are a part of taking that jump forward.
Right.
It's critical to have points
Mm-hmm.
that go alongside the process. And I think the experience of Life Action over 50 years is that churches that have great process that also understand the wisdom of disruption, points of breakthrough, and are willing to like set aside and do something radical, like to take a disruptive season, find that it complements the process in ways that take them forward and you know faster and farther than they can imagine. And it's not that we're bringing in some sort of like magic or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that we're a part of the wisdom of just how point and process go together.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like that. So let's talk a little bit about that point. And we talked about point and process, and life action comes in at a point. Um, Over the last 50 years, we've kind of discovered some things about what makes that point effective, and about what's the context and the how do we create this opportunity that actually would lead to transformation? So, can you talk a little bit about what we put into it or what we've learned? And maybe we didn't even know we were doing it until we look back on it.
Yeah, I think there's something about having just kind of an outside voice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a different context because people are meeting nightly, maybe
Mm-hmm.
versus like weekly, and so there's a power to just gathering intentionally, seeing each other, having continuity between the things that you've learned to the next night, so it doesn't slip or leak as
Mm-hmm.
much. And you can there's also like a pathway
Mm-hmm.
of how people kind of move into encounter that we've learned about. We call it the 7 responses to God, but it's basically it's not new concepts, but it is a wise path that begins with humility, involves honesty, and helps people really grapple personally with what forgiveness, both giving and receiving it, means. Um, it helps them like apply choice points of like maybe to challenge ways of thinking or even living that are out of step with like the Jesus way.
Mm-hmm.
And we call that like a repentance, but it's like a changing of mind. So it actually puts handles on what the choice points are, and invites people to take steps into that direction. And it begins to cultivate through the way that the pathway and context is set up a shared experience of being responsive to Jesus, like actually listening to his voice. He talks about that, like my sheep
Mm-hmm.
know their voice. But it's like there's a million promptings that actually come quietly from the Holy Spirit when we're still enough to listen. But we often don't have a context for that in modern life. We have a lot of noise, and a lot of it's good, but it is also very distracting. So when people are able to kind of together pay attention to it, take steps of action in it, share their experience with somebody
Mm-hmm.
around them, even sometimes have public sharing of that with each other, take an action step, come back and debrief it,
Mm-hmm.
talk about it with a friend, see how it like sets them up for the next step in the process. Like all that's part of the life action way or experience in a gathering. And the churches are giving us the luxury of that time. Life action kind of brings this 50 years of experience with leading people into those kind of contexts. So there's some important content like a pathway, but I think it's the context
Mm-hmm.
that's so powerful for people. they just are able to sleep on it, come back and keep processing it, sleep on it, come back and keep processing it. And they're actually doing something like every single one of the uh, points on the pathway has an action step with it.
Yeah.
So they're actually taking it, applying it, and then coming back and debriefing what they learned about
Mhm.
it, and then leveraging that forward.
Yeah.
And what we find is that there's just this cumulative impact that leads to like breakthroughs. People start to really have experiences of breakthrough where they address things that have been dormant or they've just been ignoring or not paying they weren't aware of or not paying attention to. And when they start to actually make a relationship right, when they take responsibility for something and ask for forgiveness, when their children are actually learning the same stuff, and they're seeing them take spiritual steps and get the joy of that. And it just starts to build this
Mhm.
momentum of like, wow, God is like doing stuff here with us. And you can read that in the testimonies or hear it from people that have been through these events that it often is this spiritual expansion. It's very explosive for them in terms of this transformation because it's like, this is really, really special. It's really, really different. It really is changing,
Mhm.
what I care about, how I'm prioritizing, and it's like connecting to concrete steps that I want to take to align my life in a different way or direction. And so when they actually say my life is changing, I mean, they mean it. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
just like a feeling. It's like they actually build a track record and see a trajectory towards a vision that has now gripped them in a different way. And that what a great place to be as a church leader because
Mhm.
you want that too, right? And you've been working for years for the Lord and doing a lot of the good hard work. And what was needed was for there to be an experience of concentration and collectivity. And so the life action way kind of takes a church rapidly forward towards that.
Yeah.
And we're accompanying the church leaders in that too, so they're getting to be a part of it and experiencing the joy of it. But then they can also talk about how to lead it forward.
Mhm.
So it can be a real benefit.
Super powerful. And it
Yeah.
really gets right to the root of that problem we identified that Christians are no more but are changing less because it's really heavy on the experiential and the relational piece.
That's right.
So and we know that's how people learn, right? Experientially and relationally. So talk about each of those. Like how do we learn better through experiencing
Yeah.
and doing and how do we apply
Well, I
that
mentioned
thought?
part of it is
Yeah.
like, you got to unlearn some things before you can
Mhm.
relearn through things. You actually have to experience and take a step of
Mhm.
something in order to be able to debrief it and reflect on it. That's what increases learning,
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
that ability to have an experience, to do something with what you've learned, and then reflect on what you did, and then reiterate.
Yeah.
That's part of learning and experience. So we know that's how people learn.
Mhm.
If you think about like how you learned how to swim, you could read 5 books on how to swim and know all the techniques of how to swim, but you're really not going to learn how to swim until you get in the pool and then eventually get into the deep end.
Mhm.
Right? That's when
And
that's
continue to practice.
that's one of the parts of experience.
Mhm.
We're also finding that like the relationship piece.
Mhm.
I'm glad you mentioned that because it's so key to both how we're broken in life and also how we are healed in life. And this is no surprise because we're made in the image of a Trinitarian God who is a relationship, like eternally. So when it says that the Bible tells us that we're made in God's image, he's actually saying God is, well, the Apostle John said God is love, or you could say God is relationship. So we're actually made from relationship and therefore for relationship. So what what we're learning about how uh, even human beings, their brains develop,
Mhm.
how they experience everything. Foundationally to all of that, from infancy, is the primacy of relational interactions. Like we actually develop how we see the world through the experiences that we have from our caregivers. Is it safe? Is it reliable? Is it
Mhm.
predictable? Who am I? Where do I belong? Who do I belong to? Those are the big issues and big questions of life. They're all questions of relationship. And our brains actually develop around the way we answer those questions through those experiences. So we're deeply broken by experiences of unlove in the same way that we're blessed by them. So because we live in a broken world and because none of us are perfect, our parents weren't, and our experiences are marred by all kinds of unlove, we carry wounds and like fears and reactivity and all that to life that come out of those relationships. When we ask the question of like, how would I change? How would I be healed? We're right at the subject of uh, those relationship experiences. So what's amazing about the way of Jesus is that he doesn't give us a concept. God doesn't give us a concept. He does give us the Ten Commandments, but ultimately he comes as a person. He actually comes himself to give the world a different kind of relational experience of what love looks like. This is love.
Mhm.
Not that you love God, but that he loved you and gave himself as a sacrifice
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
So that is an experience of a relationship of love that's not like none other. And then he keeps moving towards you, saying, I don't want you just to clean up your act. I want you.
Mm.
And those experiences of love are what change us. And then Jesus actually says the way that people will come to know this love is in the hands, the feet, the eyes, the interactions of people that belong to me. Like you're actually going to know my love through the love of another person.
Mhm.
Fundamental to healing, I want to say, is these new relational experiences of love that come in the Jesus way. Well, we're facilitating that like crazy in our event. So it's not just a concept you're getting or revival, revival concepts. You're getting a revival way that involves this experience of God, of love, of relationships, of each other.
Mhm.
And that's the most powerful thing of all in healing the human person.
Mhm. And getting to that, when you the way that you talk about that, it feels a little bit different than how church is done today, right? A lot of the relationships are you get about 30 seconds to stand up and shake the hand of the person next to you, and you're not really sure exactly what's going on in their lives. And I'm not sure we've ever lived in a time where we're more relationally disconnected. And so it probably feels vulnerable and messy, but it's probably because of that why it's so important.
Like I think there's in some ways no better time than right now to have these kinds of experiences. And you're right, it's crazy. It's so different because, our world is very, very disconnected. It is very, I mean, we have more Facebook friends than ever,
Right.
but we have less face-to-face friends or real friends.
Mhm.
And we're so mobile and so busy that even the people we like, we kind of drive in and out of their lives. And so people have this deep longing for a depth experience in relationship of any kind. They don't have time for it. But here a church is making this time and they've done this crazy thing of actually coming and it is scary and radical. But then they're just so hungry for it. So you can feel the palpable sort of like um, anticipation sometimes in an art in a congregation. And they're like, are we really going to do this? Like, we're really doing this. But it brings them back. I mean, they're like, that's what we're finding is like the most counterintuitive thing in the world, which is to set aside for a long time and to do something crazy like an experiential gathering, uh, while costly, is absolutely captivating,
Yeah.
to people, and they come back.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because they've been spending their lives week to week sitting next to somebody beside them, looking that way. And this offers a context to kind of reorient towards each other.
Yeah, turn towards each other,
Yeah.
talk to each other.
Talk to each other. And then at the root of that, though, is that God's love almost reorients.
Yeah, it's
Too,
something
right?
supernatural also
Yeah.
going on because there's a coming through,
Yeah.
and that's the context,
Hmm.
and the content part of it is like all of that's being shaped, prepared, facilitated. If there's a wisdom to the life action way, it's just practitioners like ministers who have had repetitions and not knowing how to do that. There's like a shared wisdom.
Yeah.
Like, what would you do in a space like this?
Right.
And it's kind of like it's scary for ministers. Like, it's scary, when you've never had that particular experience, you don't know what to do. While there's always going to be a sense of faith and like we can't make this happen, and like we don't know exactly what's going to happen. which makes it real, there also is a wisdom of like,
Mhm.
oh yeah, we've done this before. We know how to have people turn and face each other. We know how to facilitate those
Mhm.
conversations. We can lead you through the path.
Right. We can create that context and then invite the Holy Spirit in to do the work, right? And that's kind of our playbook. But that's been learned over decades and decades and decades. And just now as we're turning to look back on that, we're seeing how the brain science
Yeah.
supports all of that.
There's a
And
convergence.
yeah.
There's a convergence where people now are realizing that uh, we've got to have real experiences
Mhm.
in order to change. We've got to have real relationships in order to change, and they need to be rooted in love. They need to actually be corrective in ways that benefit us.
Mhm.
You know, and when you put all that together in the way of Jesus, there is real healing, there's real transformation, and there's real revival.
Mhm. Thanks for listening to this episode of Changed Lives. If you were encouraged or inspired by what you heard, I want to invite you to take the next step. You can support the people whose story you just heard and others like them by visiting lifeaction.org/changedlives. Whether through prayer, giving, or sharing these stories, you can be part of what God is doing to revive relationships and transform lives.